Max had very firm opinions about mornings. As far as he was concerned, they arrived far too early, smelled overwhelmingly of wet grass and postmen, and involved an inordinate amount of kettle noise. They did, however, also contain Anna, which just about redeemed them. On this particular Sunday morning, Max lay on the old rug by the front door, apparently asleep. In reality, he was on duty. His heavy German shepherd head rested on his paws, but his ears twitched at every clink, hum, and distant bark. Every draught that slid under the door brought him news: who had taken their bins out late, which neighbour was cooking bacon, whether the postman was yet within grumbling distance. Max was an impressive animal, large, deep-chested, black and tan, with ears like upturned satellite dishes and thoughtful amber eyes. Delivery drivers tended to step back when he appeared, as though reconsidering their life choices. Underneath the formidable exterior, however, lived a cautious, observant soul. He had not always lived in this quiet little house with its blue pot and lemon tree by the door. Before Anna, there had been the shelter. The shelter was a world of concrete and echo, metal bars that smelled of disinfectant and old fear, a constant background choir of barking, punctuated by the sharp slam of doors. There, in pen 27B, he had been called Maximilian 27 BGS, a name that made him sound more like a model of washing machine than a living creature. People had come and gone along the corridor, peering in at him through the bars. Some did the high, nervous, "He's a big boy, isn't he?" routine. Others tapped at the metal and said, "Good boy," in voices that wobbled slightly. Max watched them all with grave, steady eyes, ribs showing just enough to inspire concern. Whatever trust he had owned at the beginning of his life had withdrawn to a small, well-fortified corner deep inside. Then, one day, Anna arrived. She came smelling of raincoat, pencil shavings, and coffee. She did not squeal. She did not poke her fingers through the bars. She simply knelt in front of his pen, rested her hands calmly on her knees, and spoke to him in a low, even voice, as though they were both already in on some private joke. "Hello," she said. "You look like you've seen far too much nonsense for one lifetime." Max considered this preposterous human. His nose flickered, gathering her scent. Something about the quietness of her posture, the lack of frantic movement, reached that hidden, hedgehogged bit of trust inside him. Without entirely meaning to, he felt his tail shift, just a fraction, but enough. Weeks later, those same calm hands fastened a new collar around his neck, opened a car door, and his life of echo and bleach and metal bars slid away behind him. In Anna's house, the days settled into a set of comforting rituals: walks by the river, a sensible schedule of meals, biscuits for special occasions, warm evenings where the sound of rustling pages meant Anna was near and staying put. Max decided that, above all things, he liked staying put. He devised all by himself a private rule that was far more important than sit, or stay, or leave it. Where Anna is, there I must be, unless there is Bath. On this Sunday morning he heard the kettle begin its predictable shriek in the kitchen. With a sigh that was largely for form's sake, he hauled himself to his feet and padded in, nails clicking on the tiles. He planted himself squarely in the path between the fridge and the counter, as one does if one is a large dog with a finely developed sense of entitlement. This forced Anna to sidestep him and mumble affectionate insults like, "You big hairy roadblock," while one hand strayed, almost automatically, to ruffle the fur on his head. Max considered this an excellent arrangement. Sundays had a particular flavour: no work shoes, no frantic hunting for keys, no sharp smell of rushed, bitter coffee. Instead, there was the softer, slightly dusty smell of Anna's old walking jacket, which carried the ghosts of 100 past excursions, damp leaves, sun cream, and the slight, honest tang of damp dog. She took the jacket from its hook, looked down at him, and asked the most unnecessary question in the world. "River?" Max's answer was immediate and full-bodied. He stood up in one powerful, hopeful movement, ears pricked, tail thumping the cupboard. River meant smells, river meant sticks, river meant walking beside Anna with the world unspooling in front of them. They stepped out into a sky that couldn't quite make up its mind, patches of blue floating in a general atmosphere of grey. The air had the wet, green bite of early spring. They took the familiar route past a line of front gardens, each seemingly belonging to a different philosophy of horticulture. One was so meticulously trimmed that even the grass appeared to have been combed. Another was an enthusiastic riot of roses, dandelions, and what Max privately categorized as ambush plants, anything with thorns, nettles, or burrs. He checked each fence and gatepost with professional efficiency, updating his olfactory records. Which dogs had moved in, which cats were sitting on windowsills, which households had added that most volatile of small mammals, the toddler. At the start of the riverside path, Anna clipped his lead onto his collar. Max submitted with the resigned air of someone who has already lost this argument several times. Along the next stretch, the river had been slowly eating away at the path, undercutting the bank so that the earth hung out over the water like a badly designed balcony. Recent rain had left the ground soft and sullen. Anna called this part the dodgy bit. Max called it the bit where I am pointlessly on the lead. But he accepted that humans with their poor balance and inferior claws needed more help staying alive than dogs. The river was high and muddy, moving with more purpose than usual. It had lost its cheerful burble and acquired a deeper, more impatient voice. Instead of chatting pleasantly against its banks, it slapped and muttered as though rehearsing grievances. Max listened. Rivers, in his experience, were usually well-intentioned, but easily overexcited. Today, this one sounded overexcited. They rounded a bend, screened by a tangle of elder bushes, and the source of the new tone revealed itself. A large tree, wrenched from the opposite bank in a recent storm, lay half-submerged in the middle of the stream. Its root ball and branches formed a thorny, chaotic barrier across much of the current. The river, obstructed and irritated, boiled and twisted as it forced its way round and through the tangle. In the central channel, the flow funneled into a fast, constricted rush that dragged at anything careless enough to approach. Max stopped. The fur along his spine made a series of independent decisions. Anna, being human and possessed of inadequate ears, took a tentative step closer to the edge to get a better look. "Wow," she murmured. "Look at that." The path here, thanks to a week of heavy rain, had taken on the texture and loyalty of cold porridge. Max felt the soil shift under her boot. The edge of the bank, softened and gnawed at from below, had been waiting for exactly this nudge. It gave way. It went not in dramatic chunks, but in one smooth, sickening slide. A section of bank the size of a kitchen table detached itself and tilted towards the river. With it went mud, grass, and Anna. 1 second she was upright, boots safely on the path. The next, there was simply no ground beneath her. Her arms flailed, her face flashed through an expression of pure, round-eyed astonishment. Then she dropped out of sight over the raw edge of earth. The lead snapped tight. Max was jerked forward, claws scrambling. His front paws shot towards the gap, skidding on the treacherous surface. For a split second, the old rule, "Where Anna is, there I must be," screamed in his bones. But the sound rising from below was no ordinary splash. It was a roar, a deep, complex, angry sound. The air pouring up from the newly opened mouth of the river was cold and rank with stirred-up mud, and that particular metallic scent that all creatures know without words. Danger. Every instinct told him to follow. Another instinct, older, more feral, shouted back, "Hold!" His claws, those much-maligned furniture-scratching implements, found a patch of firmer turf, just shy of the crumbling edge. They bit in. His body dropped into a desperate crouch, shoulders screaming. The collar cut into his neck. The lead burned across his back. Below, Anna hit the water badly, catching a root on the way down that spun her sideways. The river folded over her like a blanket dropped over a candle. The cold was so absolute she could not, for an instant, remember how to breathe. Water punched its way into her nose and mouth. She flailed, disoriented, with no clear sense of up or down, only the booming, deafening rush in her ears. She surfaced once, coughing, spluttering, eyes wild. The current had her by the legs, dragging her rapidly towards the snarled branches of the fallen tree. The branches strained hungrily at the flow like skeletal hands. The lead around her wrist went taut again, biting into her skin. Up on the bank, Max felt that pull. It was as if the river itself had seized the other end of his lead. He snarled, an ugly guttural sound he very rarely made, and threw everything into resisting. He lowered his hindquarters almost to the mud, planting his paws as far apart as they would go, every tendon and muscle standing out under his thick coat. The ground crumbled under his claws, but he shifted minutely, inching back to any scrap of solidity he could find. The river hauled. Max hauled back. For a few agonizing seconds they were perfectly balanced, dog and water, in a grim tug-of-war, the lead a thin, vibrating line of argument between them. Anna went under again. The second time was worse. Now she knew exactly what waited. A submerged rock clipped her ribs, pain blossomed and vanished in the chaos. Her lungs howled for air. The lead, agonizingly tight on her wrist, also pointed upwards towards salvation. She kicked, half swimming, half being dragged. By pure accident, one boot scraping over a buried stone, a slight change in the angle of her flailing arm, the force of the current on her body shifted. There was the smallest, barely measurable lessening of weight on the line. Max felt it. To anyone watching, nothing visible changed. To Max it was like a door cracking open a fraction. He lunged backwards, jaws clamped, eyes wide. Every game of tug, every uphill walk, every ounce of shepherd breeding in his bones came together in one monumental effort. Anna's head broke the surface again. She coughed, choked, then felt herself being pulled not only upwards, but sideways, towards the torn edge of the bank. Her free hand slammed into the raw soil, fingers closed around an exposed root. She clung to it with the single-mindedness that only truly frightened people possess. "Hold on!" a new voice shouted from somewhere above. Max, ears filled with river and blood, registered only other human. Boots thundered on the path. A man skidded down onto his stomach at the edge, mud smearing his coat. He flattened himself, reaching down over the drop. From his vantage point he could see the absurdity of the situation in one clear, sharp image. A pale, mud-streaked face, arms pinwheeled, a thin lead stretched impossibly from dog to drowning woman. "Take my hand," he yelled. Anna pried her fingers from the root and reached up. For a sickening moment their hands slid on mud and water, then their fingers locked. "Got you," he grunted. Between them, the stranger above, Max heaving with every fibre of his being, Anna half swimming, half scrabbling, the balance finally tipped. The river tried one last, resentful tug, then lost its grip. Anna's boots scraped the bank, her knees thumped into mud. With one final clumsy heave, she flopped over the edge and landed in an undignified heap on the path. For several long seconds she lay there, staring up at the cloudy sky, chest burning, lungs operating on instinct. The ground under her spine felt astonishingly solid. Air, ordinary, unremarkable air, suddenly seemed like the finest thing she had ever tasted. Max was on her before she could sit up. The stranger, sensibly, unbuckled the lead from her wrist, and Max surged forward, nose working overtime. He sniffed her face, her throat, her collarbone, as if checking every vital sign that his particular equipment could monitor. Beneath the mud, the river, and the adrenaline, she smelled alive, gloriously, stubbornly alive. There was the faint citrus note of her hand cream, the paper and ink dustiness of her work, the warmth of her skin. The tight, metallic knot in his chest loosened so abruptly he almost whimpered. He pressed his forehead hard into her shoulder and leaned with all his substantial weight, as if to physically pin her to the earth in case any other part of the landscape felt like absconding with her. "Easy, mate," the stranger said, hands hovering, half ready to fend off an over-enthusiastic dog, half to steady a shaky human. His own voice held the bright, brittle edge of someone whose nerves had only just caught up with events. Anna coughed again, spat out a quantity of river water and mud that would have impressed a small otter, and then managed a ragged laugh that turned into something suspiciously like a sob. Her hand, still trembling, found its way into the thick fur at Max's neck. Her fingers curled, hanging on as if he were an anchor. "Oh, Max," she croaked. "Oh, you ridiculous, wonderful dog." Max did not understand the words in that way humans do, but he understood tone, heartbeat, and the way her hand shook as it clutched him. He pushed closer, ribs buzzing with leftover fear. The stranger, now discovering a foil emergency blanket at the bottom of his rucksack that he had never quite expected to use, shook it out with a crackle and wrapped it awkwardly around Anna's shoulders. The river, having made its attempt and failed, hurried on with its business, chattering downstream as if nothing had happened. A robin landed on a nearby branch and scolded them all for the disturbance. Later, in the back of an ambulance that smelled of antiseptic, rubber, and peppermint, a paramedic would shine lights in Anna's eyes and proclaim her lucky. Neighbours would arrive at her door with casseroles and concerned exclamations. The story would be told and retold, gaining a little embroidery each time. "Your dog saved your life," people would say, looking at Max with a mixture of awe and the slight discomfort of someone whose worldview has been nudged. Max, stretched out at Anna's feet, would blink politely and accept a biscuit, filing the remark alongside all the other strange things humans said. In his understanding, the matter was simpler. Anna had slipped. The river had tried to take her. He and a passing human had declined that proposal. In the days that followed, Anna walked a little more stiffly and smelled faintly of bruising ointment and hospital corridors. Max, for his part, made one small, firm adjustment to his rule-book. On Sundays, when they walked by the river, he stayed a fraction closer than before. When they reached the dodgy bit, His shoulder touched her knee, gently insistent, guiding her a step away from the edge. His eyes tracked every placement of her boots with quiet suspicion of the ground. Anna would feel the nudge and look down at him with a crooked smile. All right, she'd say. I get it. Safety officer. Max would simply breathe in her warm, familiar scent, satisfied, and reaffirm his private law. Where Anna is, there I must be, and whatever the river, the mud, or the day may try, they are not having her.